Hi, Councillor Sabi George.
Hello again, Madam Chair.
See Councillor Flynn, Braden, Arroyo, Campbell, just getting we get the order and we'll get going in a moment. Let me just see if I've got the BPS team. All right. We're just gonna get the BPS team in here. Okay, I've got Angela and Delaverne. Can you guys just test out that your cameras and mics are working and all? Angela, can you say something?
Yes. Hi, Councillor Bach.
Great, awesome. We can hear you. Delaverne?
Councillor Bach.
Great, awesome. And then I've got somebody under BPS DOT that I assume is also affiliated with you.
Yes. So it's another computer I have like running for.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is in fact a robot, not another person. So
Correct.
we don't need to rename it. Okay.
Correct.
All right. Well, I think we are ready to go. So I'm gonna gavel this hearing of the Boston City Council's Ways and Means Committee to order. For the record, my name is Kenzie Bach. I'm the District 8 City Councilor and also the chair of the Council's Ways and Means Committee. This public hearing is being recorded. It's being live streamed at boston.gov/city-council-tv and broadcast on Xfinity Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and FiOS Channel 964. We will be taking public testimony at the end of this hearing. If you wish to testify via video conference, we ask that you email Michelle, MICHELLE.A.Goldberg, GOLDBERG, at boston.gov to sign up. And when you're called, we ask you to state your name and affiliation or residence and limit your comments to no more than 2 minutes, just so we can make sure all comments get heard. And you can also submit written testimony, including if you're watching this after it airs, by emailing ccc.wm, that's for Ways and Means, so ccc.wm at boston.gov. Today's hearing is on Docket 0167, order for a hearing regarding the fiscal year 2020 Boston Public Schools transportation budget. I'm joined here today by the lead sponsor, Councillor Sabi George, and also in order of arrival by Councillor Ed Flynn, Councillor Sabi George at large, Councillor Ed Flynn, District 2, Councillor Liz Braden, District 9, Councillor Andrea Campbell, District 4, and Councillor Ricardo Arroyo, District 5. We'll be hearing today from Angela Zhang, the Assistant Director of Finance Operations for BPS Transportation, and also from Delaverne Stanislaus, the BPS Transportation Director. This is a hearing, I'll go to the lead sponsor in a moment, but it's a hearing that we also had last year. And I think, as folks know, transportation and the transportation budget as a portion of the BPS budget is a continuing challenge for the city, and something that we on the council have long looked to kind of control and bring down. So that's sort of the spirit of this today. I will go, and I see we've also been joined by Councillor Michael Flaherty at large. And we are expecting some public testimony later from Representative Nika Legardo, our state representative representing JP and Mission Hill in my district. And welcome to Councillor Julia Mejia as well, Councillor at large. So I think I'm going to go right now to the lead sponsor, Councillor Sabi George. And then I think we'll go to the presentation, since the goal is really for councilors to ask questions today and find out kind of where we're at. So we'll hear from the lead sponsor, and then we'll go straight to BPS for the presentation and then run through colleagues' questions. So Councillor Sabi George, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Prior to the pandemic, we saw the cost of the BPS Transportation Department continue to grow year after year. In many years, there were cost overruns that were not budgeted for as well. We started holding this hearing as a mid-fiscal year checkup. We on the council needed to better understand why approximately 1/10 of the BPS budget goes to the Transportation Department. Through these hearings, we've learned that our geographically complex school district, our high concentration of students who need bus monitors and or door-to-door service, as well as the state requirement that the district transport non-BPS students, all contribute to the high cost of transportation. Prior to the pandemic, we were very excitedly on track to begin to see some cost savings as the rate of the department's cost increases year to year began to slow. However, the last time we held this hearing was in February of last year, when very few of us had any idea of how 2020 would actually go. I know that there's CARES Act and ESSER funds that have greatly impacted the BPS budget overall, and that just last night, President Biden signed the latest stimulus package. I'm sure that this will impact the district overall, so we have a lot to catch up on, and I'm eager to hear from our panelists today. Thank you very much, Councilor Brock, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Sabi George. Now I'd like to go straight to the BPS team. So Angela or Dilivern, which of you is starting?
Thank you, Councilor Bach and Councilor Isabi George. I want to say good afternoon to all of the councilors that are present today and everyone watching. My name is Dilivern Stanislaus. I am the Director of Transportation for Boston Public Schools. I now want to pass it over to Angela.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Zhang, and I'm the Assistant Director of Finance and Operations in the Department of Transportation.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to jump right into the presentation. The pandemic that began a year ago presented unprecedented challenges and opportunities to reimagine how we deliver transportation services to Boston students, both within and out of the city of Boston. Starting this past spring, the transportation team began transforming every element of our operation to be more flexible, responsive, and safe. This presentation will go through the service changes and the costs associated with the COVID pandemic to date. Over the past few weeks, DESE released new guidelines for buses and reopening schools, requiring another set of significant changes to transportation. The transportation team is working rapidly to respond in collaboration with the district and BPHC. This presentation does not include the new implication of the latest DESE mandates. We want to start this presentation with what the transportation operations look like in a typical school year, so we have a starting point to discuss how service has changed this year during the pandemic. Next slide. The Boston Public Schools Department of Transportation transported 24,000 students to 235 sites, both in and out of the city of Boston daily. Our buses perform 3,100 daily trips, covering 43,000 miles. Approximately 5,600 non-BPS students are transported to 150 non-BPS sites. This represents about 20% of our students transported and 50% of our sites served. Nearly half of our bus stops every day are at student homes, ensuring door-to-door transportation for our highest need students. Our budget also encompasses many non-transportation related expenses, such as health insurance and retirement for our transportation-specific workforce. Next slide. This slide shows a breakdown of the transportation operation expense structure in a typical school year. 70% of our transportation cost, to the tune of $92 million, flows through our contractor TransDev to provide yellow bus services. Of the remaining expenses, the larger categories are dispersed among bus monitors, students in transition, and MBTA passes. Next slide. This slide presents a more detailed breakdown of the larger cost drivers to yellow bus services from the contractor TransDev. As you can see on this slide, the $92 million allocated to TransDev for yellow bus services, $70 million, or just over 75%, is allocated to personnel costs. Within the $70 million of personnel costs, 90% is allocated to the 3 bargaining units, of which bus drivers are the largest group, making up the largest portion. Personnel spend also includes wages, fringe benefits, health benefits, and workers' compensation. No other city department bears the cost of retirement and insurance benefit as part of their budget. Next slide. We'll now spend a few minutes discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the services that BPS Transportation provides. Throughout the year, transportation has consistently pivoted to maintain flexibility and adapt to the evolving public health situation and school reopening timeline. This slide shows the different phases of the district's reopening throughout the year and the level that transportation was operating at during each phase. The district reopened all schools on October 1st for hybrid in-person learning for the district's highest needs students, private schools, and out-of-district special education programs. Schools then went remote from October 22nd through November 15th, except for out-of-district special education programs. Starting on November 16th, BPS then reopened for its highest need learners at 4 schools. On December 14th, BPS expanded in-person learning for high need students at 28 schools, and then expanded that to all Boston public schools starting on February 1st. Most recently, on March 1st, BPS added K0 through grade 3 to in-person learning, and is continuing with the phased-in schedule with 4th through 8th graders starting on Monday. As you can see in the table, except for the period from October 22nd to December 13th, BPS has been running over 500 buses and 1,000 trips daily throughout the school year. DESE and state guidelines have significantly impacted service provisions at our bus yards and on buses, and we've implemented significant measures to ensure staff and student safety. Approximately 300 plus employees are moving in and out of each of our 3 bus yards daily. Because of the new social distancing guidelines, the transportation vendor had to reconfigure the bus yard to ensure employee safety. All internal operations for drivers and bus monitors have moved outdoors into outdoor tents with tent heaters for inclement weather. Vendors were hired to disinfect buses and all internal high-touch areas twice daily. Sanitizing machines were installed on buses and around the bus yards. PPE gear continues to be ready and available for all employees in the yards and on buses for students. Temperature-taking devices were installed and additional staff added to support safety protocols, cleaning, and symptom check station. DESE guidelines reduce rider capacity on buses to around 35% of normal capacity. Decals and signage were added to bus seats to ensure social distancing on buses. It is important to note that DESE has recently modified its guidelines for social distancing on buses. The district continues to work closely with BPHC on the safest ways to adopt these new guidelines. Finally, before moving on to the cost side of things, we'd like to spend a moment talking about how we routed students for transportation during this uncertain time. We want to highlight this because how students are routed and scheduled directly impacts how cost flows through the system. In order to preserve flexibility and allow the department to quickly respond to the year's rapidly changing reopening timelines for both BPS and non-BPS schools, the department decided to preemptively route all students who were eligible for a bus and did not opt out of transportation or in-person learning in September based on the best available data. Students were routed regardless of when they were going to begin in-person learning. This is demonstrated in the example bus roster shown on the right-hand side of the slide. Each student on the roster has their in-person days listed as well as their in-person start date, which could be updated throughout the year. Drivers only service stops for students who are scheduled to attend school in person. This allowed us to turn routes as well as individual student stops on and off as needed as school reopening timelines changed. We communicated closely with drivers and monitors throughout these changes and encouraged driver dry runs in advance of each significant school reopening to ensure smooth first days for students. However, all of this also meant that when the drivers bid on routes in September, they were bidding on routes which may not have yet been active or which may not have had many students riding yet. Drivers were compensated for full routes once they were scheduled, and even if the work hadn't yet started or during times when the routes were turned off, again, this was necessary in order to preserve flexibility and adaptability as school reopening timelines changed. One final thing to highlight here is that the complexity of the situation is not limited to BPS. There are over 100 non-BPS schools that we service, many of which serve special education and other particularly high-need students. Each of the schools has their own schedules and reopening timelines, and many have hybrid schedules that do not align with BPS. This has really furthered the need for prioritizing flexibility in our routing and operations in order to accommodate student schedules. Next slide. Service delivery changes have increased cost in some areas of transportation while decreasing cost in other areas. For example, we see an increase in yellow bus transportation services, central office seasonal customer service reps, and a decrease in bus monitor services, homeless DCF transportation, MBTA pass services, bus purchases, and insurance. These increases and decreases will be explained in the following section of the presentation. Now I want to hand it over to Angela, our Assistant Director of Finance Operations, who will do a deeper dive into the impact of COVID-related costs on our fiscal year 20 and 21 budgets.
Thanks, Del. At this point, now that Del has gone over how the pandemic has affected service delivery by transportation, I'm going to cover how these service changes flowed through the transportation operating expenses. We'll start with an overview of FY20 and FY21 total spend impact, and then go through deep dives on the major categories of spending. First, looking at fiscal year 20, last fiscal year, the final spend came in at 1.7% over budget. Highlights here include increases in yellow bus transportation costs and in bus monitor costs. These increases were partially offset by decreases in students in transition service costs and MBTA costs at the end of last year. Moving on to this fiscal year, we are projecting to end in line with the budget as COVID-related increases are offset by cost savings. Highlights include decreases in typical yellow bus transportation costs and in bus monitor costs, as well as decreases in students in transition service costs and in MBTA costs. However, these are offset by significant non-personnel COVID spend that is related to public safety. We'll go into deep dives on specific cost categories starting on the next slide. First, regarding yellow bus personnel costs. Consistent with the city's overall stance during the pandemic period, bus yard and driver personnel have been made whole. In FY20, after BPS moved to fully remote learning, bus drivers were paid at pre-closure payroll rates for the remainder of the year. It's worth noting that this constituted a net increase compared to previous years. Some drivers worked during this period, even though BPS schools were remote, supporting food deliveries to students who needed them. Non-driver personnel were also made whole during this period. Moving forward to this fiscal year, in line with typical years, bus drivers went on unemployment for the summer period, but they were compensated at the pre-summer rate for the month of September. Beginning in October, once BPS started opening some of its doors, drivers have been compensated based on scheduled routes from the bid in September. This harkens back to what Del was saying before, which is that in September, the transportation team proactively scheduled routes in the hybrid model for all students who were eligible and did not opt out. This was done in order to maximize flexibility to accommodate reopening changes. However, this meant that the payroll cost coming out of the September bid was much closer to a typical year than one might expect. Because of the BPS policy so far of staying fully remote Wednesdays and students opting for remote learning, we have seen a net 15% decrease in wage costs so far. We anticipate wage costs to increase, however, over the remainder of the school year as more routes are scheduled. This includes because of changes from the DESE mandate for schools to begin reopening or opening 5 days a week for subsets of school grades starting in April. The next deep dive is specifically on yellow bus related public health costs. These were the unbudgeted emergency costs related to changing facilities and bus yards, extensive bus cleaning, as well as PPE and safety supplies. It's worth noting that we are still sorting out the exact amounts for the COVID impacts related to the rest of the year, as some of this will depend on the situation on the ground. Some highlights of the larger cost drivers in the construction costs to date are expanding spaces for personnel who did have to stay indoors. Recall that the vast majority of operations needed to be moved outdoors for personnel safety. For reference, about 300 personnel move in and out of each of our 3 bus yards each day. An example of personnel who still needed to stay indoors are our mechanics, who needed more room between them during daily work on the vehicles. Another example of rooms that needed expansion were the bathrooms at the bus yards. Other public health costs to highlight include intercom systems and electronic signage to communicate effectively with personnel who were outdoors. One other example are the heated tents that Del had mentioned for outdoor activities such as the daily check-in process. This was particularly important over the cold winter months. This next deep dive is on bus monitor impacts. In FY20, bus monitors were paid post-closure at the payroll rate immediately before BPS went remote. As I believe was mentioned in the last budget hearing a year ago, we were on track to be over budget on this line before the pandemic hit, as we had better hiring and coverage that year compared to previous years. In FY21, we had originally planned to target provision of 1 monitor per bus to enforce public health standards. This would have increased costs significantly. However, the team experienced severe challenges in hiring during this period, leading to less than the targeted coverage, and to ultimately payroll for bus monitors coming in below expectations. Moving on to the customer service team, who answers family and school staff school staff questions on transportation issues. This is a significantly smaller cost line compared to the ones we just discussed. However, in both years, we did experience overages, last year at 80K and this year at 40K. Last year, customer service representatives, or CSRs, were also made whole as part of the city's guidance during the pandemic period. As part of this, BPS Transportation did not reduce seasonal customer service staff. That year, we also switched from a fully seasonal staffing model to having 5 full-time employees to support continuity and expertise building across school years. This year in FY21, transportation CSRs help staff the general BPS family hotline from July through October 2020. We've also had some increased staffing over the reopenings to enable rapid communications and strong customer service for families through this challenging time. Now I want to talk briefly about transportation services across district boundary lines for students in transition, both students experiencing homelessness and students in the care of the state. We have seen significant decreases in service utilization by this group of students across both fiscal years. Last year, after BPS went fully remote in March, this service stopped for the rest of the school year. Beginning in May, however, BPS did hire vendors to drop off meals to families experiencing homelessness who needed them. This continues through the present. This year, we have also seen reduced costs because students have had fewer opportunities to attend school in person. That said, we've seen the total number of students in transition go up about 10% so far this year, even though they may not have used transportation services. We expect both the number of students in transition and those who use transportation services to continue to increase over the remainder of this school year. Finally, there are 2 additional areas in which we have been pursuing cost savings. Regarding MBTA, we negotiated a $1 million refund for FY20 that will be received over the rest of the contract term, which goes through FY22. A few weeks ago, we also closed a second agreement for a $2.2 million refund for September through January FY21. 1.8 million of this will be received this fiscal year and the remainder in the next fiscal year. We're also in active discussions with our auto insurance carrier regarding a credit for reduced bus utilization during the pandemic. At this point, I will pass it back over to Del, who will give some reflections on the continued impacts of COVID-19 on the remainder of this year and beyond.
Thanks, Angela. Next slide. Due to the Boston Public Schools' existing reopening plans, we do anticipate an increase in service over the remainder of the school year. This means there will be an increase in all typical variable operating costs. Many questions remain about the level of social distancing and other restrictions in the near term and for the fall. As stated on a previous slide, DESI recently released new guidelines lifting some of these restrictions. The district continues to work very closely with BPHC and DESI to evaluate how best to safely transport students. One positive outcome of this period is that the transportation team has been able to double down on strengthening operations with TransDev and building a better, more equitable communication for our customers. We plan to reinforce this over the upcoming weeks and months and looking forward to the fall. Next slide. As I sit here today, I would like to state that I'm proud of the work the team has done and continues to do during the pandemic. This slide represents the outcome of some of the hard work among many other improvements that we have already named related to data and operations. We have also improved our communication to all of our customers by implementing new and improved systems. Additionally, the team has developed a monthly performance review process, reviewing each service area with our contractor to more tightly manage our yellow bus contract. On March 1st, when BPS reopened its doors for our K0 through 3rd grade students, our on-time performance hit 95% across all 3 tiers. We very deeply understand that our work is by no means done. Providing access to safe, equitable, and on-time transportation to all students in the city of Boston is of utmost importance. However, I do feel we have been doing the critical and hard work of building a stronger foundation for transportation services, not only today, but also for the future students in the city of Boston. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delaverne. I'm gonna go straight to counselor questions, and I'll start with the lead sponsor, Counselor Sabi George.
Thank you very much, and Del and Angela, for this presentation today. It was very thorough. Would you be able to send that slide deck to either myself, or is it in our inbox?
Yeah, Counselor Sabi George, I think it came from Michelle Goldberg just before the hearing. So.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that. A couple of questions just from the presentation today. Is there any flexibility for children if they're shifting, if they need to shift their in-person days around transportation? What's that look like? And then also related to that question, if we do shift to either 4 days or 5 days full-time over the coming weeks and months, how will that process also work? Are there flexibilities, and how flexible is the system to adapt to what seems to be an ever-changing and evolving requirement and policy, especially at the state level?
Thank you for that question, Counselor Sabi George. As stated in the presentation, our team has to remain very flexible during this time. We have worked on different ways where we can be flexible if students are changing cohorts. We have been able so far to accommodate those changes. We've built some systems in place. One example of that is like year over year, we've routed in one database. We've developed 2 different databases where we've been routing students this year. As soon as the DESI guidelines came out, our team huddled, and we have started looking at our system and how we can actually jump in and immediately provide transportation for students if and when the district gets to a place where they are ready to adopt the DESI mandates.
Great, thank you for that. So just some other sort of more general conversations around, or questions around the transportation budget. Last year, BPS hired Michael Terzer as a consultant to specifically look at the work of the transportation department. My understanding is he's no longer with us. I'm curious about recommendations he made and what the outcomes were of that review and sort of audit and I guess analysis of the transportation department. And is there a report available to share?
Thanks for that question, Counselor. I'll have to check back on the report piece. I don't know that I know that question right now, answer to that question right now. But what I will say is we're very grateful for the work that Mr. Terzer did. And At the time, his main focus was on on-time performance and improvements there. And as Del mentioned, that has been a huge focus of ours, a huge focus of the superintendents. And so we have benefited from many of his ideas. One of his ideas was to actually interact more frequently in a more metric-based way with the operator, with TransDev. And so that would be an example of a place where we have pushed forward on working through ideas that we had spoken to him about. I will also say that there were some ideas that we did have to place on hold when things happened. And I think some of it is, the timing of it, of course. But I think we certainly are continuing to keep everything in mind. And there are, many different kind of work streams ongoing as we think forward to post-pandemic times, hopefully next fall, this fall, I guess.
Yes, let's please hope for that. And then my last question just for this round, and I have a few others I'll save for later. Many of our families maybe are looking forward to sending their children back to school and feel comfortable with going back to school, but maybe uncomfortable with using yellow school buses for a number of different reasons. And a long-term effort has been the Safe Routes to School design and conversation around school communities. Have we been at all looking at options and opportunities for more of our children to safely walk to school so that they don't have to utilize the buses? And we like Safe Routes to School for lots of different reasons, but in particular, when we think about the concerns of getting on our yellow buses, can someone talk a little bit about the work around Safe Routes?
Thank you for that question, Councilor Isabi George. Our team is currently actively working on a proposal to the superintendent on how we can do like walking school buses. So we're working with New Urban Mechanics. We're working with some of our district partners and some of our community partners on developing a proposal for students, like walk safer routes to schools with our students, and also including the Boston Police Department. So we are actively working on that. And actually one of the next meetings after this is with our group of our community partners to develop, to continue to work in developing a proposal for district staff to look at.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. I'm sure my time is close. I'll have questions in the next round. Thank you. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Angela, for that presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilor Isabi George. Next up is Councilor Flynn, and then just so people know the order, it'll be Braden, Campbell, Arroyo, Flaherty, Mejia, Edwards. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Bach. Thank you to the BPS team that is here. I just, my question is, are there any challenges due to the pandemic in terms of transporting our students with disabilities or any other issues that may come up as we move students back to the schools? How's the outreach going to the parents of children with special needs?
Thank you for that question, Councilor Flynn. Our team has continued to remain flexible in order to support all of our families, especially our families, our high in-person families, our students with special needs. Even when the district shut down, our out-of-district special education program that provides services to our highest need students with significant disabilities in the district, our department remained open. Bus drivers continue driving and monitors continue to be present for those students and to support those students and families. And we are, as different hybrid models come online for these schools, our team has continued to be flexible and have been able so far to adopt and pivot at any given time to support those students.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. And I guess my final question is, I often, I admire the people, the bus monitors and the bus drivers that drive our children to school. I especially admire the people that help the special needs children when they get off the bus. I'm just thinking out loud. Do we have enough of those staff that help the special needs students getting off the bus. I see some of the people from the school that come out and help, but some of them are older too, and they're moving wheelchairs. But again, I have great respect for them. But do we have enough of them, enough of those workers? And if we don't, I'd really like to advocate for them in the upcoming budget, because they're really unsung heroes in our city.
Thank you for that, Councillor Flynn. So to be quite honest, one of the areas we've struggled with hiring and is in our bus monitor line of work. We've really struggled. We've done a lot of outreach. Currently, we're working on hiring over 100 bus monitors. We're consistent. That position remains open. We're consistently strengthening our hiring efforts. Canvassing, trying to find folks to ride buses with our students. However, it continues to be a struggle because of some of the structure of the work, the timing of how the work is timed. That continues to be a struggle, but our team continues to double down, continues to look at different ways and means of trying to get people in to support these students. Over the past couple months, we were able to hire approximately 50 bus monitors, and that hiring process continues till this day.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. Thank you, Councillor Edwards. And thank you to the BPS team for the great work you're doing. And if I could advocate, if there was some city employee that deserved a pay raise, especially during this difficult time, it is our bus monitors. So maybe we take that back to the BPS team, and down the road, we'll see if we can get these guys a pay raise, okay?
We will definitely keep that in mind, Councillor
Most
Flynn.
definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, most definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. And I'm sure that although Councillor Edwards is always to be thanked, that you meant to thank Councillor Asabi George, the sponsor of the hearing.
Yeah, that's right. I apologize. Councillor Asabi George, thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Councillor Bach, Councillor Asabi George.
All right. Next up is Councillor Braden, and then it'll be Campbell, and then Arroyo. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really didn't have many questions. Thank you to all the folks who made such a thorough presentation. There's a lot of really good information in there. One question I had was about out of district students who travel, special needs students out of district. I understand that their school program continued sort of full time, or I just wondered how many students were involved in that, and were they going? Was it a hybrid model, or was it a full week?
So, Councillor, I think just to start, I don't have the exact number of students, but I know that we were scheduling for 54 different out-of-district locations. And I say scheduled because, as we all have talked about a lot, they kind of turn on and off as they manage everything themselves. So I think what I would say is that it's the out-of-district proportion in terms of how many routes that we run every day has certainly been significant this year, more significant. They did run during the remote periods. So I think just as a starting point, I don't know if Delv, if you have more numbers, but I will say that it certainly has been running. They're all different and they've been all changing. So it's a little bit hard to generalize, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the exact numbers with me right now, but we can definitely get that number to you, Councillor Braden. One of the things that you asked is if about the hybrid schedule. So they like Angela stated, all of these schools have been running on multiple different hybrid schedules. So it's been quite the puzzle to try to mesh together into the entire operation. Yep, and they've been turning on and off as these schools operate differently. So they've been turning on and off in different different hybrid schedules.
Well, kudos to you folks for managing a very complex environment with so many different ever-changing permutations. I think you've managed to do a good job this year. So thank you. Madam Chair, that's all my questions for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Councillor Braden. Next up is Councillor Campbell. And then I think Councillor Arroyo had to step away for a moment. So after Councillor Campbell, it'll be Councillor Mejia and then Councillor Edwards. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Bach. It's great to see you again from our early hearing. And of course, thank you to Councillor Sabi George for continuing to file a hearing order on this particular topic. And thank you both to Delaverne and Angela for the thorough presentation. And of course, for the hard work you guys continue to do to try to rein in costs, but at the same time, make sure that our families, children are of course being transported safely. I just have, I guess, a few questions. One is similar to Councillor Braden's point, which we can get later on, which is the number of students that are being transported that sort of drive this cost, right? Particularly folks who are out of district. Just an update on those numbers would be great. And, obviously in the midst of COVID, we've had remote learning. So there was an expectation that the savings in transportation actually would be a lot more than they currently are. So it's great to see that, frankly, FY21 is, I think we projected or budgeted for 131 million, and now we're at 130, it looks like, right? Which is great, but at the same time, since I've been on the council, the transportation budget has only gone up. It's never gone down, and it's just not sustainable. I think that's the point that every councilor has been lifting up since I joined the council. It's not sustainable over the long term. And particularly as we think about, and we're just having this conversation with our police department and their overtime budget, particularly as we think about how we're going to have to cut back or be really fiscally conservative coming out of COVID-19, we really need to be looking at these pieces of our budget that are not sustainable, of course. And so my question is, what are the strategies to rein in these costs? And if there are any reports that came out of that consultant's work or any other reports that can give us a sense of maybe it's 5 or 6 other scenarios that include the T, busing, walking, yellow bus or not, but the various scenarios where we can still transport our kids, particularly our special needs kids, who require it, but also cut down the cost. What do those scenarios look like? Have we done that for years? I've pushed the city to do a study even, it could cost us 80 million to deliver this if we use these type of services. It could cost us 100 million if we use the T and some buses and biking and walking, right? Whatever it is. So I'm curious, what are the strategies and scenarios? And if we've ever run that, that's my first question. And then my second, any conversations on electrifying our fleet is the second. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. I'm going to touch on both and then give Delaverne an opportunity to answer as well. The first question you asked is clearly very near and dear to my heart on the finance side of things. I actually want to answer it by referring back to something that Councillor Bach mentioned at the last hearing. I wasn't present at the last hearing, but I did watch the video, which is around benchmarking and understanding better how we compare to other districts who have a lot of choice. And I think this is something where we're hoping to go with it. We've started talking to some districts as well. But what we're hoping to understand is it's a puzzle. If you increase the walk zone, if you have an opt-in system versus an opt-out system, if you transport out of district a certain way, all of these things, it's a puzzle. And understanding, I think we're hoping to understand what is the cost that we incur? How does it compare to other districts who do also do those aspects of things? And then I think hopefully from there, have a more nuanced conversation as a district with the rest of the district leadership about whether or not we want to spend our funds on those things that we are gaining. So like having more transportation and a smaller walk zone versus, the opposite, having an opt-in system versus an opt-out system. There are always trade-offs, and there are reasons why we have the policies we have. But what I can say is, just from the initial benchmarking we're looking at, I can tell you that other districts, we looked at Denver, New York City, New Orleans Recovery, Chicago, and some others. They, like us, have aspects where they're kind of like more generous and aspects where they are less generous. I'm looking at the list right now, and it's basically like a mix. But I will say we are more generous on almost every dimension that we've surveyed so far, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to kind of look at a little bit more.
Can you give an example when you say more generous, and what on some more specifics?
Yes, absolutely. So one example would be, I guess maybe the simplest one. And again, things we have to just look at is just the hourly rate of our bus drivers. It's a big driver of cost. Another one would be the walk zone. A number of other districts do have 1 mile cutoffs, similar to us. Some have 2 mile cutoffs, which would be more cost savings. Opt-in, opt-out is another example, where if you have an opt-in model, then you have fewer, sort of empty buses, but is it equitable? Can we do it in a way that is equitable? So I think we're starting to think about all of that, and also kind of have conversations with other districts about it to inform this. The other thing that we're doing, which is separate, but in parallel, is I think hearkening to what you were saying also about just our budget and how hard it has been to control costs. One of the things we've been thinking about a lot is how do we actually estimate cost savings from the proposals that we have? And so this is work that we're just launching. I do want to be transparent about that. But I think that one of the things that we've been thinking about is just the structure of how the costs flow through the system. Proposals typically come in the form of changing riders, so at the student level, or changing bell times. But the costs flow through in 3 kind of tiers of fixed costs. So you have the fixed cost of the bus route, you have the fixed cost of the bus itself. So I think that one of the things that we're trying to understand is how to navigate that and figure out better ways to trade off against the different cost savings proposals, both in terms of prioritization, but also in the hope that when we have those investments reductions in the future, we can give something that's more practical and realistic.
Well, I do want to say, I want to thank you actually for being candid about some of the pieces that the district is undertaking right now, even though they've been conversations for years. So it's a little unfortunate, but thank you to you incredible ladies, Delaverne, God bless you, love you. But no, thank you for your leadership there and your candidness. But I would love to see, and Angela, maybe you can share this with us, what you're just describing, these scenarios where we're comparing ourselves to other districts, opt-in versus opt-out, the pros and cons. But I would also like us to see an expansion of the scenarios. So, if we yellow buses in, no yellow buses, like all of the possible scenarios. I think other counselors who are no longer on the council brought this up before around just, we can't have too many scenarios. When we think about $130 million and it keeps going up, the public, I think, wants to see us, along with counselors, all of the options that are available to us, weighing the pros and cons, of course, to have more ideas of what is possible to still deliver safe, efficient transportation while also getting a handle on these costs so they're sustainable long-term. So looking forward to receiving that along with any other options. And I know I had one other question. I see the gavel on electrification. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, if you don't mind just doing it. All right, Councillor Mejia, and then it'll be Councillor Edwards.
Can someone answer that, Councillor Brock, or no?
Wait, sorry.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Wait, one second.
Electrifying the fleet.
Councillor Mejia, yeah. So electrifying the fleet. Let me just go to Councillor Mejia, and then we can come back to it on a second round, and that'll also give.
Sounds good. Thank you, ladies.
All right, Councillor Mejia. We could hear you a second ago. Now you're muted. Counselor? See, I should have let you go, Counselor Campbell, because Counselor Mejia?
Sorry, hello.
There we go. Yes, great.
My goodness, there was another sound coming out of my phone and I wasn't sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you great now.
Okay, great. So I guess, thank you so much for that presentation. You know, transportation is always a big hot button issue, and I do appreciate Councilor Sabi George for bringing it to the forefront. I'm curious, you earlier you talked about school bus routes out of the district. Can you explain? Is it for high need students? Are there other expenses that you were referring to? I'm just curious.
For that question, Councilor Mejia. The out-of-district transportation that we were talking about was specifically pertaining to our high needs special education students.
Okay. And I'm curious in terms of the budget for that. Aside from the Boston Public Schools, are there any other resources that help to support that line item?
So what I would say to that, Counselor, is that I don't know that we can do cost sharing. In fact, I'm pretty sure that we cannot do cost sharing because those students are Boston students, our students who we do place outside of the district to support their needs. However, we do seek reimbursement through Medicaid. It's actually the reimbursement channel. And I believe that some of that reimbursement is attributed to students who are going out of the district. Just to add also one point to that is we do also transport another group of students across district lines, and those would be students in transition. And in those cases, sometimes there are cost sharing agreements with other districts. Again, that's very situational. And those are, what I would say is those are very different and separate from the out of district transportation for students with special education. The other thing is, I know this came up before from two counselors, but our team was able to let us know that there are 200 students who are out of district students riding right now.
Okay, 200. Wow. Okay. And then I'm also curious in regards to the safe, the walking buses situation. I think that, you know, I think that this is a catch-22 when we're thinking about quality education and you're thinking about the reason why we're transporting. Sometimes I see maybe 2 or 3 kids on a bus and they're going from one low performing allegedly school to another low performance allegedly. And I say allegedly because I think that we're miscategorizing our schools. I don't think any of them are, you know, just that's a whole different narrative there. But I do believe that we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about this transportation situation and being super mindful that we need to just be more thoughtful about that transportation, because I have seen buses with 1 or 2 kids in them. And I'm going to assume that probably that's because the bus route has finished and there was probably 20 by the time. And now I'm only seeing 2 and I'm making a whole hypothesis based on 2 kids that I saw on the bus. But I have heard from families that a lot of these buses are empty. And I'm not sure if you guys have looked into that cost analysis and what recommendations, if any, you have as it relates to that.
Thank you for bringing that up, Councilor Mejia. One of the things that I want to note is that our buses often run out of time before they run out of capacity. So yes, there are some of our buses that are not filled to capacity, and the reasons because of that is how students are dispersed across the cities that we transport. And some things that play into this is our current assignment system for students.
But is it possible when you're planning to cluster up the students more effectively. Like, I mean, that's probably near to impossible because all the schools start at different times, right? There's all of these needs. Look, I'm sure you guys have tried every single little option that there is to cost, to save money. But I do think that the district and some of your partners need to start thinking about this as an integrated, like everybody needs to really think about how we work together, because otherwise it's this push and pull and everybody's pointing fingers as to, oh, it's this and that. But I just think that at some point you all need to have a come to Jesus conversation with the district and figuring in some of your external partners and figuring out how do we reconcile this in a way that it makes sense so that everyone walks out of this feeling like no one is losing anything. You know what I mean?
Yep. Our team continues the hard work of looking at ways to optimize our transportation system, especially in times where like traffic in Boston has gotten worse over the past couple of years. We've seen some struggles there, but our team continues to look at innovative ways to continue to optimize our system. And we'll continue that work consistently, because getting money back into the classroom for our students is most important.
Counselor Mejia, do you have any final?
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having bad internet issues and I'm not sure if that gavel is up because, oh, I see the, oh Lord, I see the gavel. I'm good. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Counselor Mejia. All right, Counselor Edwards, and then it'll be myself. Counselor Edwards? Counselor Edwards, can you hear us? Okay. Let me just text her. All right. While we wait for Counselor Edwards to come back, I'll just jump into my questions. So, no, you're here. Great.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I am so sorry. First of all, thank you, Counselor Sabi George. I think since I've been on the body, you have pushed this conversation and have demanded to know full transparency. As I understand, this is the largest budget item, or one of the largest budget items for BPS that is not, period. And it's not technically in the classroom. And so I think one of the best things about your leadership on this has been, are we restructuring and investing in a way that helps our classrooms get more equitable? I have had issues with in my district, and a lot of my colleagues have really discussed all sorts of aspects of transportation in the budget and so on and so forth. I'm going to pull back and ask you kind of a question about lessons learned from this moment, because I don't doubt that this is going to be one, the first pandemic, or two, that this pandemic won't come back, or three, that we're going to have to adjust again. So one of the things I kept pushing during the height of this pandemic, and still do push for, was why aren't we using all of other facilities to educate our kids? Why didn't we use our hockey rinks? Why didn't we use our large area spaces? Why didn't we use those things? And when I spoke with Brenda, in full transparency, like, why aren't we being as creative as possible? If not for all of our kids, then for those with special needs, so that those kids could have continued their education. And retrofitted, I mean, a hockey rink has ventilation, it has a lot of different things, and it's used for all sorts of things. In the North End, you want to go to a convention for food, you want to do the first night, you want to do anything, you can go to the hockey rink because you just put the carpet down, so on and so forth. Now, I know I have an abundance of hockey rinks. I'm an embarrassment of riches. I think I have 2 in Charlestown, 1 in East Boston, and 1 in the North End. Not everybody has that, but we do have city facilities that could have been retrofitted. And so the response that I understood was we didn't have the, we couldn't figure out the busing for it. That was my answer. The response is we couldn't figure out the bus schedules, or couldn't figure out how to get the kids all around there in order to do kind of social distance mass education sites. And so is that true? Is that why we didn't ultimately think of be as creative as possible at the facilities? If it's not true, or if I'm incomplete and misunderstood, I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus, will you come up with a plan going forward that involves the busing for mass education social distance sites, so that when this comes back, and it will, and let's say we have to take a week and say we need to clean up all of our schools, or we need to do certain things, or we need to respond very quickly to a crisis and cannot go the regular routes, do you have a plan B emergency route that keeps people safe and going to school?
Thank you for asking that question. So our team continues, especially throughout the pandemic, has continued to be flexible and also build out new systems. And as you asked about lessons learned, I know as the director of transportation, right, one of the lessons learned during the pandemic is that like we have to continuously look for ways to be flexible, to refine our systems and our approach to transportation, especially when we're thinking about transporting students, our highest need students, ensuring that access to education is equitable across the district. Our team has leaned in to a lot of this work and thinking creatively, especially now we have like new DESE guidelines coming out. And just as a parent myself and who has a son in the district who has really struggled really bad with remote learning, the importance of being flexible, looking at all the different ways to equitably transport students to and from school. Our team is continuously leaning into these approaches and learning new ways, talking to other districts, looking at different innovative ways of making this work better.
So that didn't really answer the question. I appreciate that there's work being done. So I'll just repeat kind of the question again. We have a pandemic coming. We have different facilities around the city. How will you plan, or do you think you should plan for folks to be able to get to those facilities so we can at least continue educating some of our most vulnerable populations? So I want to know your plan B for next time this pandemic hits.
Counselor, I appreciate the question.
Sorry.
Sorry, Del. What I was going to say is I was reflecting on that particular situation, and I will just say that I actually I do not know about the specifics of like the facilities this time around. I'm just going to say that, but I think what I was thinking about, and I would say I would name one challenge that we are working on that we need to continue to work on that affects this, and then to your point on plans, like how we can do this going forward. So I think that on the planning side, to start with that, is we do transport students to non-school locations. So the best example of this is actually alternative stops for students who go to different facilities or different places for after-school care. So I just want to say it's not impossible for sure for us to transport kids to other facilities. So just want to make that point. However, this brings us back to why it can be really hard. And the reason is that we have issues, which I will tell you, we're still working on structural issues around timing. So if you were to tell us that we have to transport to 5 different locations and we had a certain amount of time to do it, I think we would, hopefully even now be able to say we can do it. I think that where we need to kind of get into the specifics a little bit is how much time we have and how much data specificity we have with regards to getting it done. And I think that what I would say there, one last point, if it's all right, is when it comes to students with high needs in particular, I think that those details become even more important because then you're really specifying the type of vehicle, the monitors, and all of that. And sometimes that is also what drives the need for a little bit more time. So those are just some reflections.
Yeah. So I know my time is up very soon or is already up, but I wanted to put this in terms of the planning perspective, right? So again, because we are still learning lessons. Okay, this is not a you guys did something bad. All right, this is a what lessons can we take so that the next time this happens. Okay, so one thing I think we could look at is how we reopened, or what students we prioritize in terms of age and population. Why is that important? If you have people in category A, which are young kids who are high needs, right? Category B could be just young kids. And so whatever the DESI puts as our list, you have category A, B, C, and D. I think what would help is if BPS had the number of each category of those students. There's 5,000 in A, there's 5,000 in B, there's 16,000 in C, all the way down to the high school students, which seem to be the lowest priority in terms of bringing back to school. Okay. If you have then that number, then again, this is people just pull back. We're in a vacuum. Being able to plan, then you are in category A, parent, you've just registered your student. They will be on a normal bus to do blah, blah, blah scheduling and so on and so forth. That's wonderful. But in the event that there's a pandemic or for some reason we need to alternate where your child is educated, category A children will follow this bus route, going to whatever. Category B, so just basically getting them that information so far upstream so that it's very clear. Like if we're going to adjust and category A is allowed to go to school, this is how you're going to go to school. I'm only suggesting that because I just think the biggest question I got from my parents was, why the hell not? It's right there, it's open, it works, and it was like, it's by my house, and it was just the frustration that a lot of us receive. And again, I didn't mean to co-opt this, Councilor Sabi George. I felt this was part of the conversation of your regular thing, and maybe if you think it's too in the weeds, we can maybe think of an alternative hearing just for transportation and pandemic. But I don't mean to harp on this or to make you feel in any way, shape, or form that you did something wrong. I just want us to be able to already be doing lessons learned. That's all. That's it for me, Councilor Bach.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Okay, I'm going to jump now into my own questions. I'll start with the question that I cut off Councilor Campbell on, just because I was trying to get through everybody, but she was asking about and I noticed from my own notes from last year, Angela and I alike, when looked at last year's working session on this, that it was one that I had asked as well, which is about the electrification of the fleet and what the prospects are for that. You know, when we talk about transportation, one of the things we frequently talk about is the fact that not only do we have a lot of yellow buses that are running well under capacity, but also they are idling and emitting fumes in many of our, environmental justice neighborhoods, right? So this is like a kind of critical double issue for us. And I'm wondering where we are on the electrification of the fleet for Councilor Campbell.
So just to start us off, thank you for the question. We were anticipating it. What I would say is we're actually actively working with Bill Coughlin at the city on understanding what it would mean to do an EV pilot. So this is active work we're doing. Bill is the fleet director for the city of Boston, and he has 15 EVs in service. Last I spoke to him, and 8 more coming in. We've also spoken to other staff of the city in the climate and environment teams on some of the technology and grant opportunities. This is a little bit dated. It happened before the pandemic hit. But what I would say is that we've identified some of the things that we need to kind of think about more, and we're working with Bill and others on them. But for sure, we need to work closely with the city on options for charging, and if we can work with them together on that, and also how to work with Eversource and the electric infrastructure. One of the things I will say is that on the pilot side, and we need to revisit this again with the new technology, but we're trying to understand a little bit whether if we did a pilot now, would those, I guess I should say, is this the right timing? Because we want to do a pilot with the buses that we would be using. And there are kind of considerations around range, considerations about charging and all of that. So we are working through some of that. And it's one of the questions that we want to ask the other districts about as well. I believe that there was in one location, not school bus, but a different type of bus that did have some sort of trouble with their EV. So I think we would like to just really make sure before we put our students on one. But just to finish there, I think we're very, very interested, and we're building it into kind of active conversations around our fleet replacement. Fingers crossed, ASAP, but we'll see how it goes.
So what's the point at which we might have some projections on that kind of in our capital expenditures budget?
It's a good question. What I would say is at a minimum, we would need to have another round of discussions with some of the folks I named. And the reason for that is because, frankly, I am not an EV expert. So I think one of the things we've been doing is just trying to make sure that folks who do have the expertise are evaluating the different types of vehicles we could buy, and some of those specifics. So unfortunately, I'm not sure I can commit to a specific date, but I can tell you that hopefully actually in a couple weeks or months, we'll have a better read on that, and we would be able to share that.
Great. Yeah, no, I just would underscore that I think on all things kind of climate related, that we're looking to go from sort of plans and aspirations, which is something the city has extensively, to kind of, the stepwise functions for how we get there. And this is one of those things. So it would be great.
If I may add one thing, I think just in line with what you're saying, one of the things we've been working on with our operator TransDev is to actually do more forward planning around our fleet in general. This involves looking at different fleet types, replacement periods, and basically it has two functions. One is for us to do more planning around the exact vehicles we're going to purchase over a longer horizon, so sort of buying it every year, which is not what I'm saying we used to do, but just really kind of focusing on this. And then the second is it'll have the other benefit, going back to the budget question, of allowing us to, I think, project our budget more accurately. Because as we kind of track this data around our fleet and aging more closely, we should be able to come in closer on some of the costs as well. So I agree with you, and this is something that we're hoping to build with our contractor.
Great. And on the contract point, I think it came up at last year's working session that, we've been operating this TransDev contract on a series of one-year extensions for a long time. And the question of kind of, and I know that had previously come up in terms of us kind of paying for one more bus yard than we were even using. And so I wonder if you could give us an update on where that contract is at and what our prospects of kind of actually releasing a new RFP are for a longer period of time, and whether there are things that we've learned during the pandemic where it could have been useful to have contract flexibilities that we didn't have that we could fix in a new RFP. Where are we on all that?
So the answer to that, just to start us off, is this is obviously something we're actively discussing because there are 2 more one-year renewals, including the one that would start in July. So what I would say is, yes, there will definitely be more activity on this front imminently. I would prefer not to talk about the specifics because it is being discussed, but what I will say is that this is one of the top priorities on the finance side in the department, and we see it as a real opportunity for us because, as we talk about here, it's a $90 million contract right now, and the costs, as Councillor Campbell said, they have been increasing in the past. We're hoping to taper them. And what we're also understanding is that changing in the middle of a year, like rapidly, is extremely disruptive and I think bad for the kids, frankly. And so what that means is when we go into the next contract, it's going to be for a sustained period of time. So what I would say is not kind of saying what exactly is going to happen this year or next year, but I think we think this is really important. We're actively working on it. And I think we want to make sure that the next time we go out for a bid and go through this, we're really thinking about this in a long-term way, because I think it will be something we'll be kind of using for a while.
Great. Well, that's great to hear. And yes, I won't dig too much further into the contracting details. I think I should underscore what Councillor Campbell said, which is it's great to hear your team thinking so capaciously about this challenge. And it's just clear that you guys have been doing a ton of work on it. And the presentation you gave us was one of the more detailed and helpful ones that we've seen. So just really want to appreciate all your work. And so don't take I'm a Ways and Means chair, so don't take my questions as hostile. I think you guys are doing a great job, but I guess a follow-up question for me, because I think I've got like another minute, and then I'm going to pass it to the second round for the sponsor. But the enrollment declines are an issue that we will be discussing in general with the superintendent, and I'm not looking for you guys to discuss that sort of overall challenge for the district. But I am curious what enrollment declines tend to mean for this issue, because obviously it's not as simple as we have fewer students to bus, because in some cases those might reflect students going to charter schools or other places where we have an obligation still to bus them. And then also I imagine that there are certain economies of scale we lose in the same way that we have that challenge with our school buildings. So, I mean, obviously we've seen some significant unenrollment in the pandemic. I think we're all hopeful that that trend will reverse, but there has been a kind of overall trend, and I'm wondering kind of how the council should think about that vis-a-vis these issues.
I'll start from a cost perspective. What I would say is this is something that we've been discussing with the BPS finance team. For the purposes of this coming year, we are planning for, hopefully, as you said, the students to come back. But I think that the issue itself of the declining enrollment is certainly timely, and actually one that there has been a downward trend in any case. So what I would say is this goes actually right back to what we had started talking about before, which is the fixed cost issue and what you're starting to get at. And so not to get too much into it, but what we're actually hoping to do is to work with some folks who can help us probably do a little bit of modeling to understand at what number of students do we start seeing us be able to reduce routes, which is, I think, what I would say is like the first level of significant costs. Like if you can reduce a whole bunch of routes, then you can reduce hours, and what we've seen previously with smaller amounts of declining enrollment is that a lot of the kids are corner students, and there's somebody else at the bus stop. And so when they leave the system, we still run the exact same route. But once you drop enough students out of the system, then you start removing door-to-door students, you start removing corner stops because everybody at the corner stop is gone. But I think this is actually a little bit more of a modeling issue. And I will say transparently, I don't think that we've figured out the thresholds yet.
Got it.
And I think, Councillor, to your point as well, when looking at the decline in BPS enrollment, I think that we also look at, to your point, like charter school enrollment and also our private school enrollment, because these are schools that the Boston Public Schools Transportation Department is obligated to transport to as well.
Right. That makes sense to me. It's not necessarily, it's a more complicated formula. Yeah. All right, great. I'll end my questions there since the timer went off on me, and go for a second round to Councillor Asabi George, and then any other councillors who have some follow-up questions. Councillor Asabi George.
Thank you again, Chair Bach and Dell and Angela. Thank you again for the presentation earlier and the depth of conversation you've been able to have with us, and certainly demonstrates your deep knowledge of this work and your commitment to this work. So, this hearing over these last few years that I've called for is really that mid-year report to look at spending. So as we prepare for the budget cycle upcoming, we understand if there are potentially cost overruns. And you went through that in your presentation just perfectly. And I appreciate all that information, and we'll certainly go through it with a finer eye on some of those details. Part of this conversation also is around lessons learned throughout the school year. And because this year has not been an average and hopefully will not be a school year we repeat, I wonder about some of the celebrations and acknowledgement around the on-time arrival rate, and what have we done specifically to improve that on-time rate, and what are we going to do to keep that going forward as more kids return to school, as traffic returns, because that is, very frustrating for families, certainly impacts the child's academic experience, losing time in the classroom and all of that. So I'm curious about that. And then my other question that I want to make sure that we get to is, that's great that we've got the refund or reimbursement or whatever on the M7s and some of the MBTA stuff that we've done with the T. But I wonder what the process is for getting M7s back into the hands of our kids that use public transportation, and what about replacements for that and some of the challenges around that? Thank you.
I can kick it off, and then Angela, you can jump right in. To answer that question, so our team has doubled down and started having monthly performance reviews with our contractor TransDev. During the pandemic, we've had an opportunity to really have the TransDev team run some audits of their systems, and our team running these monthly reviews, reviewing all aspects of the operations and identifying areas in which the operations can improve, bid processes, the timing of some of our bids that affect our bus routes, getting out late to pick up students. These are some of the areas that we've doubled down on. Another area is our proactive communication, and also proactively working cross-functionally with some of our other internal partners here at BPS. Communication was a big thing that we've heard from the council, from parents and families. Last year, Councillor Campbell, I don't remember, one of the councillors, I think it's Councillor Campbell, that brought it up, really looking at that system. For example, one of the things that our families consistently complained about is timing of the mailers that went out to parents and families, and it's been very disruptive in terms of them getting their transportation assignments in time and being prepared for the start of the school year. Our customer service and communication manager in transportation has done an excellent job on doing a deep dive into our systems and changing some of the ways, and actually bringing us up to the 21st century into some of the things that we're doing. So using a lot more technology with parents and families. Even our system for when issues come up with families, we've had a faster turnaround time in following up with our families and fixing issues, as we have a system similar to the 311 system called Fresh Desk now, where families can go right online and text us, and instead of waiting on hold for a customer service rep to get to them. So these are some of the systems that we have been refining internally, and it's been working out very well for parents and for families, for students, and for our schools. We've been getting a lot of great feedback, and we have seen a drastic turnaround in our on-time performance, drivers and monitors. That was another struggle for us in terms of communication, getting out to that big workforce, and we have looked at some innovative ways on communicating with that large workforce consistently. The other question that you asked surrounding M7s, all of our M7s have been distributed to all of our schools, and students have been working with schools and picking up their M7s. If a student lost, and all of our schools have buffer passes. So if a student was to misplace an M7 pass, or a pass isn't working, a student can communicate right to their school, and their school would replace their M7's pass at any time. Or they can reach out to our office, again, online, through our text system on Fresh Desk, and let us know, and we'll be happy to support. They can call our office. There are multiple different ways they can get a hold of us. Email, our school bus email, where we can support them right away. And the turnaround time on getting their M7 is pretty fast.
I imagine with kids returning to school, and the older kids starting to return to school in these next few weeks, that we're going to see some real issues around just getting M7s into the hands of our kids, and certainly lost, or they never pick them up in the fall and that sort of stuff. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you for the response. And you mentioned the bus monitors. I know last school year, pre-COVID, there were some challenges around picking up students that required a one-to-one bus monitor, or a bus monitor on the bus, and buses were just passing kids by and leaving them on the corner. Have we, I understand Angela mentioned some of the challenges with hiring additional monitors. Are we though at a point where buses that require a monitor in order to pick up a kid, that where that problem has been solved?
To be very transparent, Counselor, that problem has not fully been solved, but
Okay.
our team is actively working. I can tell you right now, like our team is actively working and looking at creative ways to ensure that our highest need students that really need a monitor on the bus, that we are compliant and have a monitor available for those students.
Great, thank you. All right, that's it for me, Madam Chair. Dell and Angela, thank you again.
Thank
All
you.
right. Great. Thank you so much, Counselor Sabi George. Counselor Braden and then Counselor Campbell. Counselor Braden.
I think folks have answered many of my questions already, so I waive my time at this moment. Thank you.
Great. Counselor Campbell, I'm sorry, I sort of went ahead and asked the electrification question partly, but
I'm all set. Yeah, I can review that and get more details from you guys. Thank you. I just wanted to thank Delaverne and Angela for your hard work. And Angela, thank you and welcome to the team in Delaverne. See you soon. Thank you, Counselor Bach.
thanks, Counselor Campbell. Counselor Mejia? Let me just,
Okay, it's never the right type of Zoom unless somebody's on mute. So sorry about that. No, I just really wanted to thank you both for the thorough presentation. I think that every time I participate in one of these hearings, I learn a little bit more about how difficult it has been for you all to juggle all of this. And so I am just incredibly grateful and looking forward to figuring out how we can help support you all. I see that Counselor Flynn, if he's still on, he's on a trend. All departments need more people. Every single hearing I've been in, he wants more people. So y'all get ready for this budget hearing season because Flynn is on the rampage on advocating for more everywhere. So thank you all. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Counselor Bach and Counselor Sapi George for bringing us together.
great. Thank you so much, Counselor Mejia. I had a few follow-up questions. So one is just on this bus monitors point. My understanding was that from last year was that part of the challenge is that the frequency with which students are assigned to need a bus monitor has hugely increased over recent years in their IEPs. And you combine that with the fact that it's is it a sort of like per diem pay thing? Right. So it's a kind of unpredictable job where people are not being paid so much so that then if they find something better, they leave. Right. And I think we also frequently have trouble with people canceling. So what that makes me wonder about is, I mean, it is sort of along the lines of Counselor Flynn's point, but more like, do we need a not just to sort of raise the pay, but to change the structure of this job? Like when you say you guys are looking at things, I mean, I guess one question that I think came up last year was the question of, is there even a way within the IEP model where we could move towards like kind of bus monitors on certain routes, but maybe not like one per kid, but that way there's somebody, or if that's not is there a way to kind of group and routinize this service such that our students are supported, but we're not dealing with this kind of unpredictability? I just wanted to dig a little more into that.
Thank you for that, Counselor Bach. With the support of the superintendent and the head of our special education department, the transportation team is getting ready to do some like deep dive work with some support from schools and things of that nature to look at different things, to look at some of the things that you just named, and also look at just like the monitors work as a whole. Is there different ways we can structure this? Is there different things that we can do we're looking at everything, to be quite honest. Everything is on the table right now. And some of this work is going to start rolling out very soon. Like the superintendent has like put her charge out there. And this is work that we're going to be leaning into as soon as possible, very, very soon. It's quite imminent.
Yeah, and I'd just add two things. That one is just to specifically answer your question, Counselor. We actually went back to the special education team to discuss some of the questions around one-on-one monitors and whether, there would be some way to, a compliant way to change the model in some way. And I think what we got from that is the legal requirements are the legal requirements. But I think the idea that was presented last year was, would it be possible for us to provide one monitor per every bus? And then would that reduce some of the anxiety on the part of parents, which is understandable, of just really wanting to make sure that there is an adult on the bus for their child, and maybe going for that one-to-one monitor. And I think the answer to that, because it comes up often, is one that we would have to see it play out, to see if that behavioral change really happens, because the IEP process is centered around the student. And then the second thing is, if we were to move to one monitor on every bus, because we kind of really costed out this year, it is very expensive. And because of the way monitors are compensated right now, which is per run, half of the runs per bus run, half of the runs prior to this year had a bus monitor on it already. But if we were to go to one monitor on everyone, we'd be doubling the cost. So it would be raising the cost, excluding benefits, from 10 million up to like maybe around 20 million. That's not to say that we shouldn't do it, but I think it just increases the urgency on kind of the conversations around the structure of this, but also I think provides a little context on like sort of the financial constraints we're in.
No, that's super helpful to understand. And then when you were talking about sort of the benchmarking rubric, which was something that I had asked about last year, and I would love to see, as Councillor Campbell would, in terms of the things that we're more generous on, I have an impression that we do more like door-to-door stops than most districts, as opposed to corner, but I don't know if that's true or kind of where we are on the spectrum there.
So that one, actually, we haven't looked at yet, but we can certainly add that to the list. I think, just to put it out there, I think because the door-to-door accommodation also does come through the IEP process, we actually originally didn't include that because it, again, is very student-centered. So it's actually, I think, I would say one of the levers, I guess, which is not really one that we can directly control, because it just comes out of this individualized process. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I think we should add it to our benchmarking list, but it might be able to help us understand why we might be more or less expensive, but it wouldn't necessarily be something that could inform an action plan as easily as something else.
No, I understand the idea, right? That it might not really be a policy lever that we can pull. But it would still be helpful to understand how it drives cost, I think, for us.
That's very fair.
My instinct, but yeah. And then I guess just, could you guys speak to, I saw a few notes on the slides that made me worry a little bit about, so we're currently coming in $1 million under the transportation budget. Obviously, I think there are lots of lay people who would have expected us to save a lot on the transportation budget this year. And Councillor Campbell referred to that because of us not having most of our kids in our physical buildings for 6 months of this fiscal year, right? It's been more than 6 months, but in this fiscal year. So, and I understand that we sort of made that decision for maximum flexibility to kind of fund all those routes. But I wonder, because of the notes in the presentation about cost drivers that are going to go up as we get all of our kids back into school, whether the 130 and kind of coming in at least just slightly under budget for this year, whether that's factoring in the increases that we expect to see in the next 2 months, or if when all is said and done on June 30th, you're actually projecting that you're going to run over that budget.
That's an excellent question. And what I would say is we did factor in growth, particularly this doesn't have, I'm just taking a look at the deck. It doesn't have is it okay if I project a slide again?
Absolutely.
Okay, let me see if I can make this work. Let's see. Oh, don't press the leave button. Oh my goodness. Okay. All right, so hopefully you guys are looking at the FY21 spend table. So the easiest way to see this is we are in, this goes through January because we pegged it to the last budget adjustment that was presented at school committee, unless there was a big change. But you can see, for example, in homeless CCF, the actuals through January were very low. We were coming in around 1 million, but we were projecting to actually spend 4 million through the end of the year. So we projected based on what we believed the increase would be. And I should say we're already seeing increases month by month on the bus monitor line in particular, as more students have been coming back in and all of that. But I would still say though that, Counselor, your question is a good one, because what this hasn't directly kind of, we haven't really taken a direct lens looking at the April DESE mandates in considering all of this. So I think we absolutely need to do that. And, we have many bargaining units. And I think one of the things will be that we will need to kind of consider that and sort of see how the April impacts flow through this chart.
Yeah, I guess it would be good as a follow-up to just kind of understand from what that potential delta is. As we think about, this is not your this is not your fault or context, but we had a hearing this morning which implied that stated that our police department's going to be 15 million over what was budgeted. So sort of the question of like, where are we on just like overages budget, like FY21 budget wide, is on my mind. And I guess the one other question related to that is this whole transportation budget framework you've presented to us as kind of net within the BPS budget. Some of the increase items have to do with COVID precautions. In fact, quite a lot of them do. And I'm wondering whether any of them we expect to be reimbursable through through FEMA. I know that Biden, shortly after taking office as president, signed an executive order that made certain sort of school safety costs 100% reimbursable. And I know there's been a holdup at the state around those things, but I still would love to understand, like, is there any chance on the good news side that in a couple of months, you'll be back and say, well, our transportation for April, May, June went up, Counselor, by a couple of million, but we did get this $20 million reimbursed from FEMA. I mean, what should I expect on that front?
So what I would say is we are, as you mentioned, tracking the COVID related costs as we go through the year closely. And we're working with the finance division within BPS to understand when and if CARES and ESSER funds will need to be used. So this is a discussion that we're having with the finance team. But to your point, we're very carefully tracking all of it as we go along.
Okay. Yeah, I would just really want us to be as aggressive about applying for FEMA reimbursement on these fronts as we possibly could. And not, and obviously, and the FEMA funds, I think, have the potential to be kind of like additional to the CARES Act money, right, that we're talking about in programming. So yeah, would just love to flag that as a thing. Okay. I think, and then just a final note for me would just be on the contract front, that I would hope that in addition to thinking about a longer term contract that really meets our needs in the ways that the existing one might not, that you guys are also thinking about just ways to build like flexibility for us into that contract too. Because I feel like there's so many things we didn't know we would need levers wise that we didn't build into the last one. And we can update it for this one, but there will still be unanticipated changes and such. And so just, really wanting, when we RFP a contract for a while, that's our opportunity to really tailor it. And part of tailoring it is giving ourselves optionality too. So I would just flag a hope on that front. But I do really want to thank you guys for the really, really sophisticated and professional presentation and work today. This is frankly, this is a very large portion of our school budget. So it's good to know that you're working so diligently on it. So I appreciate that. Counselor Asabi George, before I dismiss everybody, would you like to say any final words?
I get just again a round of thanks to the two of you for pulling together that presentation for us. It certainly does inform us a great deal on that budget piece, as Councilor Brock mentioned, and really does help us prepare better for the upcoming budget cycle. So thank you again, and thank you for your continued commitment to this work. I know it hasn't been an easy year for sure. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the BPS team and all the counselors for joining us today. I do not see any public testimony. So with that, this hearing of the Ways and Means Committee is adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.